All right, guys, it's Ryan from Motorcycle.com. Wanted to do something a little bit different this time around. Instead of jumping off of 6 different motorcycles and trying to give you my thoughts behind a camera with everyone watching, I decided to do this here at home, which is also the in-gear set, if you notice anything similar. We rode 6 different motorcycles, which was Harley-Davidson's entire cruiser lineup for 2025. So I kind of wanted to break down what the entire cruiser line has had as far as changes go, in addition to getting some kind of high-level taste test kind of ride reviews out of these 6 motorcycles, because we rode for 2 days but had to capture content, and we got a little bit of a taste of the rider aids with the bike with outriggers on it. Riding 6 motorcycles over the course of 2 days definitely isn't enough to give an in-depth kind of first ride review that we can generally do for these press introductions that we're invited to. So yeah, just kind of a high-level taste test as far as the ride goes, and kind of just my initial, most impactful thoughts on those. Let's get into the big kind of macro level main talking points about the Softail cruiser lineup for 2025. So first, let's talk about this new Milwaukee-Eight 117 engine that's being used on all of the bikes in the 2025 cruiser lineup. You've got the Classic, which is going to be in the Street Bob and the Heritage. You've got the Custom, which is going to be in the Breakout and Fat Boy. And then you have the Modern, which is going to be powering the Lowrider S and Lowrider ST. Each of these bikes has its own intake, exhaust, and state of tune. All of them also share kind of the new head design. The engine is still air oil cooled, but now it shares the head design from the touring models. So it has a frame-mounted oil cooler routing the oil through the heads kind of on the way back. They're also using the same combustion chamber, oval intake ports, basically the same thing that we saw on the 23-24 Grand America touring models with the 117 or 121 engine. I would say the easiest way, even if you don't remember which model has which, being able to identify these 3 different variants are, on what kind of intake is sticking out of the right side of the engine. As you might not expect, I guess, with some of what's happened in the past, but all of these models they're all going to be Euro 5 Plus compliant. So looking at a little bit more granular into the engines, what do we all care about? What kind of power are they making? The Classic is going to be rated, and these are all claim numbers. We didn't dyno anything over those 2 days, as you can imagine, but we have a claim of 98 horsepower and 120 pound-feet of torque coming out of the Classic engine. And Harley says that that's 4% more power and 1 pound-foot of torque more than the 114 engine from the previous model year. For the Custom, we've got 104 horsepower and 126 pound-feet of torque. That's supposed to be 11% more power and 6% more torque than the 114 engine, and a gain of 6% more horsepower and 5% more torque over the Classic state of tune. Harley also says that the new touring style intake that's on the Custom engine platform is 50% larger than what was used on the Fat Boy and the Breakout previously. So obviously you're getting a lot more airflow. For the modern state of tune that's powering the Lowrider S and ST, the claim is 114 horsepower and 128 pound-feet of torque, which is 11% more horsepower than the 24 engine, and is 10% more horsepower and 2% more torque over the Custom state of tune. So that's kind of how they break out in succession as far as their tune goes. So let's just kind of get into the next kind of pillar of this model year 2025 update, which is going to be basically rider safety enhancements. So we're talking about ride modes, we're talking about 6-axis IMU-based traction control ABS, stuff like that. So now on each one of these models, you're going to have 3 ride modes to choose from. You've got rain and road, which are pretty self-explanatory. And those are going to be basically the same across all 6 of the models. You also get a sport mode, and that one is going to vary depending on which state of engine tune you have. So Classic, Custom, and Modern, they're all going to get a little bit different state of tune and sport mode. As you could probably imagine, they kind of go from classic, custom, sport, and how, kind of aggressively they let you, ramp up that torque and get the throttle response really nice and crisp. As I mentioned, these bikes are all gonna have a 6-axis IMU. So now we've got cornering ABS, we've got cornering traction control, and then we've also got what Harley-Davidson refers to as drag torque slip control. So basically that's kind of the engine side of traction control, with the engine braking, trying to make sure that you don't, that the rear wheel doesn't lock up in terms of, engine braking. In addition to just some other little electronic bits, you do get a tire pressure monitoring system as standard, as well as a USB-C port to, charge whatever goodies you put on the bike. Something cool that Harley did at this presentation was also giving us kind of a live demonstration of how these rider aids work. The cornering traction control specifically, they had a street bob with outriggers on it, and one of the engineers, test riders from Harley-Davidson, came out and took us through the basics of how the system works and whatnot, and then gave us a little demonstration on the bike and let us take a whack at it ourselves to feel how the traction control intervenes over. Basically, they dumped a bunch of play sand over a parking lot and set up a little course, had a bike with outriggers on it, things that kind of stick off to the side so you can't kind of fall over as easily. And let us have a few spins at it. Let us change the ride modes and feel the difference. And it was a really cool chance to get to experience what those different settings feel like in the different ride modes in a safe setting. For me, it was the second time that I've had a chance to ride a bike with outriggers on it, which is a really unique experience in its own. But this was the first time I did it. Was a completely different situation, and it was with Continental on a totally different bike. And so doing it again here with the Harley-Davidson was also a very interesting, unique experience. But what was cool about it is that when you switch through rain, road, and sport modes on the Street Bob specifically, with its state of tune and whatnot, it just illustrated, exactly what you'd think. Obviously, it was the most intrusive in rain mode. It was let you get the rear stepped out a little bit in sport mode. But I think what was most interesting about it, in addition to getting to actually just feel the system working, was how smoothly it kind of gives the throttle back to you. Because it doesn't just, if the bike's leaned over a little bit and you slide, it doesn't just give everything back to you immediately, because then that's high side territory. So it really smoothly dials the power back in. It's smooth, kind of giving the reins back to you, if you will. So I would say the next kind of big pillar, and probably last one of these new models, is a little bit of a change to the suspension. In the previous year, we're using progressive spring rates, and now Harley has changed to straight rate springs on all the models. And we're not talking about crazy suspension travel here. We're just talking difference in the way it feels. All of the bikes are still gonna have around 5 inches of suspension travel in the front. You've got the Breakout, Fat Boy, and Street Bob with 3.5 inches in the rear. And then the Heritage Classic, Lowrider S, and ST have 4.5 inches of travel. The idea was to take the harshness out of the hits, on the road and whatnot. And without being able to test them back to back, it's really hard to say, but I did feel like the harshness with which, normally you hit a big crack in the road or some kind of irregularity, it delivered some pretty harsh feedback, whether it was to your tailbone or in your hands. I felt like that was improved, but again, without riding them back to back, I can't definitively say. So with all that said, let's hop into some hot takes, some quick reviews on each one of these models. We'll start off with the classic iteration of the motor with the Street Bob. So that's gonna be the least expensive one of these, which is not inexpensive at $17,200 is where we're starting on that bike. With that one, you're gonna have 5 inches of suspension travel in the front, about 3.5 in the rear, 19 and 16 inch wheel combo, 16 out back. With Dunlop rubber, you've got a 30-degree rake, 6.2 inches of trail, and a 64.2 inch wheelbase. You do have the smallest tank on this bike at 3.5 gallons. Everything else has 5 gallons in the lineup, and the seat height is 26.8 inches. The Street Bob, the engine's great. Other than that, the Street Bob is just a really odd riding position in my my opinion. You feel like it seems like the person that would fit best on that bike would have really short legs and long arms. The foot pegs are just really high up, and the kind of mini apes that it's got for a handlebar just kind of put you in this awkward position that doesn't really feel that commanding, and just kind of folds you up into a weird position. And for reference, I'm 5'8" with a 30-inch inseam, you know, so kind of pretty average height, leg size, not a very tall guy. And so the fact that I feel so crunched up and weird on that thing is kind of odd. I don't know who would really be comfortable on that bike. It also, with the foot pegs being so high and kind of mid, they're it really kind of rolls your spine back, so you're getting, you know, your tailbone is really tucked back into the seat there, and that's kind of where all those hits are coming through. Again, I do feel like the damping felt a little bit more smoothed out and didn't, the suspension generally didn't feel as harsh as what I remember on some bikes years ago, but it does start to get painful, and you kind of have to force yourself, or for me, I have to kind of remind myself to roll my hips forward to keep my back straight on that thing. And it was just kind of, I just really did not jive with the riding position. That said, again, the engine's great. You've got the ride modes and everything, and it's all good. Jumping off of, we rode the Street Bob the same day that we rode the Breakout and Fat Boy. And so jumping from either one of those bikes to the Street Bob, it's definitely the quickest handling and whatnot. It's just, again, with the riding position, it doesn't quite have the commanding riding position that something like the lowrider line does offer, although it feels similar, but we'll get to that in a bit. It is the lightest out of the Cruiser lineup at 646 pounds. These are all claimed, you know, the power, the weight, stuff that we usually measure when we have a bike in our hands. This is all claimed stuff from Harley, but they're saying it's 646 pounds. Curb weight, so ready to ride. But yeah, kind of undone by the riding position for me. Moving on to the Heritage. That's, you know, probably my favorite. But the bike's starts at $22,999. You get 5.1 inches of front suspension travel and 4.4 in the rear, so kind of the best at both ends as far as what's offered in this lineup. You have 16-inch spoked wheels at either end of the bike, shod with the Harley Dunlop tires. Got a 30-degree rake with 5.5 inches of trail and a 64.2-inch wheelbase. The seat height is 26.8 inches, and this is actually the heaviest bike in the Cruiser lineup at 728 pounds. Like I said, this is probably my favorite Cruiser because I feel like it cruises better than any of the rest of these bikes. You've got storage, you've got the windscreen, you know, everything's kind of on there already, ready for whether you just want to bounce around town or actually, you know, eat up miles. Cruise control standard on all these bikes, so definitely the one that I would want to use the cruise control the most on. And when I recently had the Harley-Davidson Hydroglide, which is based on the Heritage Softail chassis, I jumped on the bike and headed home and was surprised by how, you know, how good the handling was for a bike of its size. You know, it's still pretty nimble, and I mean, compared to like the touring lineup of the bigger Street Glide and Road Glide and whatnot, those bikes handle great, especially for the size. But the Heritage surprised, you know, back when I was riding that bike, and again, it stands out here as, you know, you've got big floorboards. They do touch down quicker than anything else in the Cruiser lineup, but it's a cool, classic style. The center of gravity, everything feels really low, and that probably helps with the kind of, you know, the handling and whatnot. And, you know, it's turning like 2,000 RPM at 55 miles per hour, so it's just the best package for real cruising, and you get that Heritage, you know, old school style. Moving on to the custom lineup, which is going to be the Fat Boy and the Breakout. We'll start with the Fat Boy, and that bike is 22.6 in terms of starting MSRP. You've got 5.1 inches of suspension from the fork and 3.4 inches in the monoshock. You've got these massive, they look massive because they are 18-inch wheel combo. The tire size is 160 for the front and $240 for the rear. Just to kind of put that in perspective in terms of motorcycling, the KTM 890 Adventure R behind me, its rear tire is a 140. The front tire of the Fat Boy is a 160. It's pretty wild. We'll get into, you know, what that does to a motorcycle here in a sec. It's got a 32-degree rake, 4.7 inches of trail, and a 65-inch wheelbase. It's got a nice low 26.6-inch seat height, and despite looking like the fattest boy here, it's actually 694 pounds, which makes it the 4th heaviest of this 6-bike lineup. And like I kind of hinted at with the massive wheels and tires, handling is not the Fat Boy's forte. The riding position is really nice and open, and I would say to me it's the second most comfortable out of the bunch after the Heritage. And that's nice when you're cruising down the highway, going straight, no curves around, but the minute you need to turn the bike, you need to put some effort into bending this thing to your will. You really gotta, you know, get some counter steering going on, because with those tire sizes, I hope you're not surprised, that affects handling. It looks cool. It definitely, this bike has a presence of its own, but its handling is just not the deal. I mean, I love the way it looks, so I almost could disregard it if I had, you know, $22,600 sitting around to just get something that I like to look at and like to cruise around town on. But yeah, the handling is pretty wild. The silver bike that we rode, again, like with the machined wheels, like the whole thing looks really cool. And actually this year, we're kind of expecting Harley-Davidson's Icon model. It was the Hydroglide last year, the Diablo before that, I believe, the ST. We're kind of expecting, given evidence that our own Dennis Chung has found, that the Icon model will be the gray. There was a bike in the 90s called the Gray Ghost, which was kind of a special edition Fat Boy. And we're expecting that to be this year's Icon model, and it would be the 35th anniversary of the Fat Boy. Moving on to the Breakout. The Breakout's gonna run you 23.1, and you're gonna get 5 inches of front suspension travel, 3.4 in the rear, a 21/18 wheel combo with 130, 240 Michelin rubber on that. And it's raked out to like 36 degrees, so definitely the most raked out of the line, with 5.7 inches of trail. As you might expect from that rake, the longest wheelbase at 66.7 inches. And it also has the lowest seat height at 26.2 inches. Everything here is very manageable for at least someone with a 30-inch inseam, so this one's just the lowest at 26.2. It's the 3rd heaviest at 681 pounds, so the lower seat height keeps everything low, makes it more manageable, so that's nice. Honestly, I was expecting, and kind of the Breakout, when we were riding the Street Bob and the Fat Boy alongside it, I kind of wasn't looking forward to jumping on the Breakout because I expected the riding position to be really uncomfortable. Turns out I was wrong. The Street Bob, like I said, was quite uncomfortable, and the Breakout was surprisingly comfortable. But yeah, so you got your knuckles and toes in the wind, and the riding position actually really isn't that bad. And the seat's wide and comfortable, so I didn't feel like on the Street Bob that I was getting my tailbone kind of whacked every time. Again, with that kind of rake and having that 21-inch front wheel so far out, you know, it's got a 240 rear tire, so it's got a big rear tire just like the Fat Boy, but the handling isn't as bad as the Fat Boy, but it's also not great. You know, with that one, it was easier to turn in and whatnot, getting around corners, but the moment you hit some bumps, the front end just kind of feels like it's just wagging around out there, and you can hardly tell what's going on. It's a unique situation. I mean, it handles much better than I would expect it to. That being said, we're not talking about sport bikes here. So the Breakout looks cool. It looks like the kind of classic 90s chopper, if that's what you're looking for. I mean, definitely, you know, tastefully updated, but that is kind of the style of the Breakout. So now we'll move into the modern bikes, which is going to be the lowriders, the S and the ST model. The S model comes in at $20,500. You get 5 inches of suspension, 4.4 in the rear. That's, again, the best of both worlds in this lineup. You have a 19 16-inch wheel combo with a 110 up front and a 180 in the rear. These are also Michelin Scorcher tires. And the geometry is going to be the same on both the S and the ST, which shouldn't be a surprise. So you're going to have, it's actually the steepest rake at 28 degrees and 5.7 inches of trail, and the shortest wheelbase at 63.6 inches. Seat heights are the tallest at a cloud scraping 28.1 inches. Obviously still very low in the world of motorcycling. And it's the second lightest. The S model is the second lightest at 670 pounds. So if you haven't put it together by now, just from the geometry specs that I've mentioned here, the lowrider, both of them, the lowriders are the best handling bikes out of, if you're gonna be burning through canyons all day, or short jaunts around town, the lowriders are gonna be great options. It's basically replacing the Dyna. But yeah, hustling either one of those bikes through a set of curves is a ton of fun. We had limited opportunity to do that around Austin because where we were at didn't offer up a lot of curves and there was a decent amount of traffic. But when we did get a chance to really hustle those things, the lowriders handle like nothing else in this lineup. They're much sportier. And that's not only due to the geometry of the bikes, it's also that front end. We have a completely different front end on this bike. It's like a 43 mil inverted fork, which gives a completely different feel to anything else in the lineup. You get really good feedback through the bars, braking, you feel confident. Everything is just kind of leveled up to, something that you'd see on a more conventional style bike in terms of what else is out there just in the whole of motorcycling. So a ton of fun. And unlike, again, the foot pegs feel just as high as like the Street Bob, but the handlebar position with the risers and the flatter kind of almost like dirt bike, kind of bend of a handlebar feels much more commanding, like you're really in control of the bike with this kind of rider triangle. But again, it definitely still leans with your knees up that high. It's still not, for me, not going to be a bike that I'm really going to want to be using the cruise control too often on. Around town, if you're just bouncing around town, you're just blasting through twisty roads, they're both awesome bikes. And so, like I mentioned before, sport mode is different for each of the 3 engine variants. So with this high output, modern, Milwaukee-Eight 117, the sport mode for the lowriders is quite a bit spicier. So like it ramps up the torque quicker and it hits harder, which is an interesting idea from Harley because I want power smoothly delivered through the entire rev range, whereas they specifically tuned it to really hit hard. And where it hits hard is about 3,000 RPM. It really ramps up the torque curve. They also actually redlines like 5,900 versus 5,600, so they bump the red line as well. So you can kind of rev it out a bit, which is cool if you're riding in a sporty fashion. But yeah, that kind of hit is very noticeable. And again, I kind of would rather things be smoothed out. I'd rather that be smoothed out a little bit, honestly, but it's exciting for sure. And when you got a button on any of these bikes, they all have a new switchgear design, and you've got a button that is dedicated for turning off traction control. You also, the ride mode button is, the turn signal is now a rocker switch on both sides. So you either use the turn signals or you push them the other way for changing the ride mode or using the horn on the left side. And one thing that I found was easy. It was easier to push back on the back side of the button with my thumbnail to switch ride modes. That made it super easy. Otherwise, it's kind of a stretch and you can't do it as quickly. So pro tip there. Take that for what it's worth with the Lowrider S. So let's move to the ST. Again, not much different there, but there is quite a bit of a difference in price. We're going from $20,500 for the S model to $24,200 with the ST model. So it's basically the same in terms of specs, but it's 42 pounds heavier than the S model at 712 pounds, which obviously is due to the fairing, kind of FXRT style fairing, and then the side cases, which are like 28 liters a piece. I dig the look of the fairing. Like, I just like the style, like the colors it comes in for this year. The kind of the finish on the engine is really cool. It's kind of this matte texturized thing on the heads, and the whole thing's pretty neat looking. It appeals to me. So between the two, I think I'd be all right with shelling out the extra coin, because it is what it is. What are you gonna do about it? But also dealing with the extra weight, because having storage is nice, and I like the look of the fairing. And if you want to pull those bags off for a minimalist look, you can, and you've always got the option of putting them back on. I guess for both, they both have the same handlebar setup, and for me it was kind of a little bit of a stretch, like just a tiny bit, but we all know how many aftermarket or Harley factory parts options there are on the market. So if you were interested in one of these bikes, you can get the ergonomics kind of set up probably however you want. So really, I mean, again, 6 bikes over 2 days. That's really about all I've got to say about them at this point. You know, there's definitely some on there that I would like to spend a little more time with. I'd like to spend a little more time with the lowrider. The Fat Boy was a lot of fun. I love the way it looks. And yeah, and the Heritage is just, that's the bike I would use for touring. And you know, it's got luggage. It's a convenient motorcycle any which way you slice it. So yeah. So if you want to see anything, like, obviously you're here because you'll enjoy watching videos on YouTube, but if you want to get more of a deep dive, see a spec sheet that's got everything side by side, take a detailed look at some detailed photos and all that stuff, please head on over to Motorcycle.com, check out the full written write-up. Thanks for watching, guys.